Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. You can take the notes as well. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulil kareem. Amma ba'd. So firstly, I would like to thank you all for being here. Jazakallahu khairan. So Jazakallahu khairan for being here, being part of this discussion. Obviously, I will start the discussion first for about probably half an hour. We'll most likely go more than that, which normally happens. But yeah, so to start off on this topic of science and Islam. So the question is, why are we engaging in this topic in a madrasa setting? What's the purpose? What's the point? And what's the thought process? And what's the philosophy behind it? So that's something that I wanted to discuss. At any point, if I'm talking, you're more than welcome to put your hand up and or just speak out and ask any question you like. We will have a Q&A at the end as well. If you need to leave after that, you're more than welcome to. And that will be as long as you need. You go on and on. Okay. Yesterday was quite long, went on for a very long time. But it's entirely up to you, inshallah. So I am going to go through this pretty much and explain every bullet point, and it will become clear, and you're welcome to write on it, and you're welcome to ask questions. So Bismillah. So I think it all begins for our madrasa, and the journey that our madrasa is taking. It begins at this point. So at the very first point, because there is a lack of academic engagement with science in seminaries. So that's in madrasas, in Darul Ulooms, any kind of Islamic institution. So there's a lack of engagement. Okay? And then that's the first problem. And secondly, it's coupled with the onslaught from scientism. Now there is a big difference between science and scientism. Islam doesn't have, or Muslims have never had any issue with science. Since the beginning, or since what's been now defined as the golden age, Muslims have actually developed science. Muslims have actually played a significant role in the scientific method, even in the labs, experimentation, etc. So Muslims have never had issues with science. But where the problem lies for us is something called scientism. So science is engaging with the natural world, okay, trying to understand the natural world, and Muslims have done that in a very harmonious way with their faith. Scientism for us is an issue. Scientism is basically when science no longer remains science, it's no longer dealing with the natural world and trying to search for answers. Scientism is where it becomes a philosophy, where everything can be solved through science, where this idea, this concept, that we will one day understand everything through science. So this is where the issue is for Muslims. So when we say this, I wanted to make that very clear, that when we're talking about science and Islam, we are talking about science not being an issue, and we will talk about that. And then we have things like scientism, where it does become an issue, and that's what we're going to talk about. So first of all, there's a lack of engagement between science and Islam in madrasas. But secondly, there's a powerful war, you can say, taking place because of scientism, and especially through the marketing and equating of evolution with atheism. So saying that evolution equals atheism. This argument is coming from scientism, not coming from science. Okay, not coming from science. And this is leading a vast array of Muslims to either denounce their faith. So a lot of people have left Islam, but even bigger list is a number, or ever-growing number, of in-closet ex-Muslims. So what do we mean by the two? So you have ex-Muslims who are out and they say, look, I've left Islam, and a lot of them also speak out against Islam as well. But there's a bigger number of people who what we define as in-closet ex-Muslims, so they haven't come out yet. So internally they have left Islam, which is actually more dangerous, okay? Which is more of a problem for us, or for them individually. So one is coming out with, I'm an ex-Muslim, and one is you don't share it, you don't mention it, and the reason for that is fear. And you never know, there are many people out there, many people out there who have internally left Islam. And Iman and faith is all about the internal. Okay? So these are the two problems. And I'll say this again. So lack of engagement between science and Islam, and that kind of is bad enough, but then it's led on by scientism's onslaught on on religion, and then using evolution, for instance, as a marketing tool to equate it to atheism. So then all the religions are now wary of, okay, how do we engage? So that's the first thing. Second thing, so I'm talking about the philosophy here, and then I'll talk about how we, as a madrasa, engaged. Okay. So then engaging initially may become on a defensive front. So now when we engage in science, what's going to happen is, because of this scientism's onslaught on religion and Islam in this case, when we do ultimately respond, we are going to respond in a very defensive manner. Okay? It's going to be a defensive start to that engagement, which hopefully later on will change. Now, the reason why this is important for us as Muslims, for me on a personal level, and why we're doing it here. So I remember when I was a teacher at a local school, talking about in Walthamstow, there was a student. Okay, he used to go for Fajr in the mosque. Okay, and he's only like 15 or 16. He used to come for the Dhuhr prayer in school. He used to also do the adhan, maybe sometimes lead the Friday prayer. One day I came to school, and all of a sudden the door opens, and there's this stampede of students running through the classroom, Muslim boys, and saying, "Oh, so and so has left Islam." That same child who was praying all the salah and everything else. So I asked him why, what happened, and he said because his science teacher, okay, he took their class to a trip to the Natural History Museum, and then they saw the fossils and all of that, and ultimately, because the teacher himself was Jewish before, but ex-Jewish now, left Islam. So it was more, I strongly feel it was more scientism at play than science. And what happened ultimately was he left Islam. Now, Wallahu alam, and I hope he has returned. We had a similar case here, but it wasn't part of the madrasa, where there was this hafiz of the Quran. Right? He spent time, like, in Jamaat and all of that, and he left Islam for like 2 years. So he's he fell out with his family, marriage, for 2 years. But alhamdulillah, through our program with Islamic Science, someone asked him to speak to us. We had a chat, just a normal discussion around. It was online actually at the time, and alhamdulillah, after 2 hours he became Muslim. So he said the Shahada again, and it was all to do with topics of science. Right? You'd be surprised, all to do with science, liberalism, things like that. And where does the issue lie for a lot of these people? So when I'm saying lack of engagement with science from these institutes, from our institutes, why did that child in that school leave Islam? Why did the other brother leave Islam? So anyway, he reconnected, and he helps out in the madrasa now, the second person. So why did they leave? Because when they go to their teachers in mosques, when they approach people, it's straightforward answers. It's like, no, we're not going to engage, or you haven't come from monkeys. Simple one-line answers. And this is where I'm going to talk about how we're going to try and approach this. We are totally against these one-line answers. Right? And by one-liners I mean when you have big speakers saying things like, evolution is a theory, not a fact. Okay, that in itself is a problem, because in science, theory means pretty much fact. It doesn't really mean theory as in other humanities. So, and the problem with that is, what it does is, when those students, when those Muslim children go to universities, and once they're out there in university, they haven't had that foundation, they've had those one-liners given to them, which is a short-term solution to the problem. And by short-term, it's this week, I started my car, and the computer came on, and it said, look, your back tyre needs inflating, or it needs more air. And so I still drove it, and on the way back, I filled it with air. It was okay. The next morning, when I was going to work, it had the same message again. So this time I upped the game, and I went to the tyre shop, and they did it. And the third day, the same problem occurred. So then I went back, and I said, look, you filled it with air, but the same message is coming up. So then he analysed. He analysed the tyre, we reversed it, and there was this big nail, which was inside the tyre, was wedged straight in. It was very, very thick, it was very blunt. As soon as he took that out, until now, alhamdulillah, it's been about, I think, 4 days, there's been no issues. So it's not about short-term solutions, it's not about those one-liners which are like those nails. It's about going beyond and really making students think, reconnecting them on a very deeper level, firstly to the Quran, That's key, absolute key. Because without that, there's no Muslimness, there's no identity for us as Muslims. We say this to our children. I'm going a bit off topic, but it's important. For example, the issue of LGBTQ. Okay. Now, how do we deal with that? I always say to our students, look, if you're going to go into discussion with someone who's a liberal or someone who's has a secular worldview, you're going to lose every time, because all they will have to do is say, look, based on science, here are the studies. It's absolutely natural to be homosexual. And then how are you going to defend that point? So our argument or our discussion should begin right at the beginning. Right at the beginning, it's you have two worldviews. You either believe in God or you don't believe in God. Right? That's the first thing. And then if you believe in God, then you look at the sacred text. Okay, that is, for Muslims, in the case of Muslims, it's the Quran. And that's where we delved in. And that's our defining point. We say to liberals, look, we're not following this, we're not looking. Science, it might be true, right? Homosexuality might be true. I mean, naturally, scientifically, but is every scientific thing the truth? Is every scientific thing moral and ethical? That's where we differ. And that's why we say, look, you either believe in God or you don't believe in God. If you do, the sacred text. So for us, that's the method we're taking, that it starts from the belief in God. And that's where kalam, philosophy, comes in, and it's so important and so key. And inshallah, I'll get through those points as well. So I've lost my trail of thought, but we'll come back to the second bullet point. So when we do engage initially, because our engagement has happened haphazardly because of all this, things being fired our way. So what happens then is, when the seeker or collective of seekers engage in an initial clash of ideas and worldviews, it also ultimately leads to a deeper-rooted understanding of oneself and one's place in the physical world, and then that has echoes in the metaphysical world hereafter. So our initial clash will definitely be a clash of these ideas, but then this is a process. This is the learning process where students will have to go on this journey. Not every child will care about these things. Not every child will care what science says or what other worldview. Not everyone will care about them, that's fine. But there will be others who will, and will need answers. The purpose of what we're trying to do is to give them the tools. Okay? It's basically the dark night, okay? And we're just giving them a torch. Okay? It's not going to obviously help them enough, but it's enough to allow them that opportunity to get by. Right? There's a town or kind of village in Pakistan called Deer, and I remember going there for about a month. They don't have street lights; it's all in the mountains. But what everyone has is torches. Everyone carries torches at night, so that's how they walk around in the mountains. So this is what this course will ultimately be. It's giving them the tools, and I think most importantly the language to be able to express themselves when talking about philosophy and science, etc. Okay, moving on to the third point. This may lead, now once they've gone on this journey, this clash has taken place, this then may lead to a lot of relearning, okay? Redefining things, and further finding meaning within sacred texts beyond their initial exposure to the tradition that the seeker may have initially found comfort in. So, there may be so many things children have already learned, which for them is black and white, and for them it's very easy to understand. But then when they engage in topics like this, they may have to rethink some of those ideas, okay, and go back to the Quran. Oh, actually the Quran says something else from what I initially understood. However, the objective of why are we doing this? What's the purpose of this process and our engagement with science and Islam? The objective is conviction and confidence in one's Muslimness. That's the first thing. So be confident as Muslims. That's the very first thing. And this is what we call Iman, right? But sometimes you can have Iman but not be confident about it. But the purpose of this is to give them that confidence. And secondly, the ultimate aim is a marriage between aql and naql. Now what does that mean? Between the rational and also the actual revealed text. Okay, so to kind of weave between the two. So for us, Muslims of the past, they have shown this. So for example, Imam Ghazali, he would say that, so he's one of the most misunderstood scholars in Islam, especially by academics. And he would say that to study maths is fard kifaya. Fard kifaya. And why did he say that? He said, in order to have a society that functions, in order to have a governance that works for Muslims, you have to have something like mathematics. Okay? However, he is criticized for someone who is believed to be the one who finished off secular sciences, but that's not true. It's not true. And I'm going to come to this point, but I'll mention this here, that for us, Tawhidic universalism is key. When the British came in, okay, to India, I think one of the worst things they did was they gave us a dual worldview. And they said, this is the words they used, this is dunyawi knowledge and this is dini knowledge. Muslims never had that concept. No, for them, everything was one. Okay, everything was one. So when they are engaging in science, for Muslims, they are engaging in tafakkur of the world. They are engaging in Islam. So that's why, I mean, the direction towards the Qibla, how do you reach, if you live in Spain or Al-Andalus, how do you reach, Mecca? You need the tools, the navigating tools. You need science to get to that level and stage. And then ultimately when Muslims create those, and they have those, then they are the same tools, the same navigating tools used by people like Christopher Columbus to navigate the seas. So, to understand, and we're not saying to our students, we need to go back to that age. No, we need to go back to the gold. No, we need to create now a platinum age. That's what we have been given. And the Quran is very clear. It's خَيْرُكُمْ مَنْ يَنْفَعُ النَّاسِ. Prophet said, the best of you who are those who benefit mankind. And some Muslim scientists saw this in that way. Today, science has a lot of good, but also a lot of bad. Okay, see, so I don't think Muslims would have ever invented the nuclear bomb. I don't think Muslims would have that kind of moral compass to be able to go down that route, because Prophet ﷺ made it clear: when you go to battle, you can't even burn trees, okay? Let alone indiscriminately kill millions and millions of innocent lives. So I don't think Muslim scientists, or if Islamic science was out there, I personally don't feel we would have gone to that stage and done that. However, there's an interesting thing I was reading a while back, if you go back 10 years, it just came to my mind. There was a book, and they said, look, if Muslims won the battle at Poitiers in France, so Muslims reached as far as Poitiers, which is about, 100 miles from Paris. So they had that final battle which Muslims lost. So this historian, he's non-Muslim, a secular academic, he said, had Muslims won that battle, what would have happened? He said, science would have actually progressed even more, and he said one of the results could have been us reaching the moon 100 years before we actually did. So this is some of the things that were happening at the time. So coming back to, obviously, the actual point. So, for example, our aim is to focus on the Quran as a book of guidance. That's key, because what's happening right now, and it's another reason for why many people leave Islam, many intellectual Muslims leave Islam, is when we start using the Quran as a science textbook. Okay? Now the problem with that, and you could disagree with that, but we've got a whole lecture on this. When you, for example, you read a scientific theory, okay, you understand something in science, so that's in your mind, and then when you come to the Quran, you're reading science into the Quran. That is a problem, right? Rather than reading into the Quran, how our hermeneutical approach should be coming open-minded to the Quran and reading from the Quran. Now the problem is when, for example, remember, science is always evolving, science is changing all the time. So for example, 300 years ago, if something was, so you have the physical world, so the physics, okay? Then you have the metaphysical world, those that are not part of our sensory world. So 300 years ago, something could have been metaphysics, beyond science, beyond physics, but now it's become part of physics. Okay? So it's always expanding, and scientism is basically, if to understand scientism, is basically like a person just standing here and blowing air into a balloon. Okay? And that's, say, the physical, or the physics, or the science. And they believe that they will continuously blow that balloon, continuously blow it, until it covers the entire room. So science takes over all. That's their belief. Okay? And that's what scientism is. That's what scientism is. And whereas we're saying, no, that's not the case. The metaphysics is where Allah is. Okay? Allah doesn't belong to the physical world. Transcends that in metaphysics. So, for example, something might be accurate based on the scientific data that's available today. And what someone does is reads that and then interjects that into the Quran and says, wow, right? This is what science says, and this is the Quran saying this. Our famous sentence is 1,400 years ago. And whereas that's not supposed to be our worldview. Muslims have never done that in the past. Okay? When they engage in science, they need the purpose of science. The science purpose is you observe the physical. So if someone asks you, and I say this to students, if you are asked, can you prove or disprove God using science? You say, actually, you can do neither. You can't prove or disprove because God is not the physical world. He's not part of physics, part of the metaphysics. And that's where religion takes its role. That's religion's role. So this is why it's important to let scientists do their thing, which is work with the physical or the physics, and allow theologians and people of faith to do their thing, which is to do with the metaphysics, but also how to live a life within this physical world. Because for us, we're living here and now, isn't it? So we're not completely divorced from it. So, for example, we did a lecture called Scientific Miracles in the Quran, a Critical Review. So the aim of that lecture was to say, look, okay, there may be some elements here and there which seem like, okay, this fits this point here in science, now this fits this point here in science, but what happens when science changes? What happens when they get more data, more information, and then it kind of evolves? What happens to those verses that you initially believed correct because of that science? A lot of people left Islam on that point, just recently, a lot of people left Islam. So aim here is to say, look, we're not going to have a scientific worldview and interject that into the Quran. We are going to come to the Quran open-mindedly and then seek guidance from the Quran. The Quran is a book of guidance. The Quran clearly mentions that. Alif Lam Mim, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. Huda, it's a guidance for those who fear, for those who have the iota of fear or something in their heart that they're seeking. For them, the Quran is guidance, and it's not a book of science. This is a key thing. So based on that, we've also had lectures with our students. We've got academics who have come in. This is our perspective. Okay, this is very much our view. We do have Muslims again, for example. I won't mention names, but they do take what used to be the Mu'tazila worldview. So what is that? Rationality comes first, and then the text, then the Quran comes second. So in today's day and age, there's a couple that I know. Okay, it's basically the science walks ahead, and the Quran must follow. So that is the part. And here, so our point is very clear. No, science is very important. Muslims have dealt with it. They've used science. They've given to science. Science is for the natural world. But the Quran, okay, it has its parameters. Theologians have their principles. Scientists need to respect that. That's where the discussion is. Anyway, moving on. The paradigms and I'm still on the first page. The paradigms and peripheries of the ever-changing physical and metaphysical realms steadily become unambiguous. So as they're engaging, as I've mentioned, slowly what happens is students begin to realize, or we hope that they realize, that look, science is something that deals with physics, and Islam is something that deals with the metaphysics. So this is the kind of difference. The frontist, or the thinker, therefore excels in understanding and tafakkur of the physical world through the pursuit of science. So if they want to understand the natural world, they do that through science. Okay? And for us, like I said, coming back to the point that for Muslims, many years ago, there was no divide. This is the point I lost my train of thought. There was no divide between secular and Islamic. It came together. Okay? And this is the key. And when did that change? When the British came to places like India and other parts of the world, and they started creating a divide between the two. And then that divide carries on in all experiences of our life. That would carry on in economics, it would carry on in politics, in governance, okay, in everything. And then we have our Muslim thinkers like Bab, who says if you take away Islam and faith from governance and politics, what you are left with is nothing but what Genghis Khan did. You are left with that. And we can see that very clearly. Even today, unfortunately, it's a very sad reality. You look at every level of society. Look at education system here. Look at the schooling system. Many children are depressed. Is that the point of education? And what they are doing is short-term solutions. Right? They're just pumping that tire with air. They're not thinking about what is underlying all of this. You go back just 30 years ago, schools were very different places to what they are now. And I very, very strongly feel Islam can give it that soul, that ruh, that it needs. Okay? And this is where we have to understand a Muslim worldview is not a dual worldview. That this is science, math, is the world, and this is Islam. And unfortunately today, whether we like it or not, it doesn't matter how much we try, our children have that worldview. That I go to a madrasa to learn about this, and I go to school to learn about this. Whereas in the Muslim world, it was all. Okay? Now, how do we bring that back? This will be a challenge. It's not going to happen over one lecture. It's for every single one of us, it's a learning, it's a process. And we'll talk about how we feel that our madrasa maybe did that in one or two case studies before. So that's key for us. For example, I mean, something that we say about Prophet ﷺ is our philosophy is all taken from the prophetic method. From the Prophet ﷺ, he is at the center of it all. Okay? And we're talking about in that human realm, because he's that model, that guide. Right? لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. Allah has made it clear that for all of us, there is this beautiful example and model in the life of Prophet ﷺ. So we're having, as a madrasa, having the Prophet at the center of this all. And we're saying the prophetic worldview was a holistic worldview. Right? So when Prophet ﷺ says, تَعَلَّمُوا الرُّمْيَ وَالْقُرْآنِ, right? He's saying, learn archery and the Qur'an. Okay? He is bringing that in one sentence. Okay? So for the prophetic worldview, all of that is encompassing. When Prophet ﷺ talks about, when you read into his life, and the way he is with children, for instance, he doesn't talk to them about faith when they should know. He makes them, he comes down on their level. Prophet ﷺ used to be like, he used to pretend to be a horse, and Hassan and Hussein radiallahu anhuma, they used to climb on the top of his back. Okay, when he used to be giving a khutbah, sermon, he used to jump, he used to climb down from the minbar, and just to embrace his grandchildren. And then they climb onto his back, or whilst he's doing sajda, and he prolongs it, and Sahaba ask, why did you do that? And he said, look, because they were on my back, I didn't want to take them off. This is true humanity. We're learning from Prophet ﷺ. Okay? And this is what we've got to bring in through the way that we're trying to do this. So that's key to understand, that the prophetic worldview is one that's all-encompassing. It encompasses all. That's why Muslims cannot understand. When I'm talking about Muslims, I'm talking about the Muslim mind. Okay? And by Muslim mind, not individual, as a whole. The ummah, the mind of the ummah should not be able to comprehend how you divide the two. So how do you take Islam out of governance? How do you take Islam away from that? That is a massive problem for Muslims. So, for example, the argument from contingency. This is the argument that we're going to teach the children. And by argument, we're just talking about being able to express themselves in a way that ultimately has a conclusion where they understand a certain point. So the argument from contingency, contingency means dependency. So the argument that, I'll just summarize it very quickly, that, for example, the tree outside. Anything that exists is contingent, meaning anything that exists, even this, is contingent for its existence on something else. Okay? Anything that exists is contingent, is dependent on something else. Okay? And then the second premise would be that anything that exists and is contingent on something else, it needs something, right? It needs to be contingent on something that it itself is non-contingent, that it itself is not dependent on others. And that is ultimately Allah. So we're going to talk to students philosophically about it, and then get some scientists to talk about that scientifically to prove this. Okay. So to understand contingency, we need to understand just one word from the Quran. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ. The word as-samad is a summary of what contingency is. As-samad means that being, okay, that is not in need of anything, but everything else in existence is in need of that being for its existence. Okay? So the argument from contingency is a non-breakable argument. They have criticism, but it's very easy to defend. So we are going to teach the argument from design, but the contingency argument is the Quranic argument. When Ibrahim a.s. looked at the sky and he sees the sun, and he says, no, this is dependent on something else for its existence. The sun's dependent on the moon, for the darkness for its existence. Similarly, the moon, and when that goes down, then something else comes into place. So they're all contingent beings. So Ibrahim a.s. argument is the argument from contingency. But anyway, just that's something that's going to be taught over the years, over the months to children. So the most important thing also about this engagement is, yes, initially it starts as an academic engagement, as an intellectual engagement. But the idea is to do it in a way, this is where the teachers will have to play that role. That how does that intellectual pursuit see also into the spiritual pursuit? Okay? So the argument from contingency is no longer then merely an academic pursuit, but transcends philosophy into a journey of realization of Allah and conscientiousness of our contingency. That we are contingent. Every single one of us is a contingent being. We are dependent on Allah. And we make them think about this. Okay? Everything in this existence, they should be able to prove the existence of God through contingency, even through this microphone here. They should be able to prove that God exists through this microphone, not just through the tree and how beautiful it is and through nature, no. Just even this. Okay? This is contingent for its existence on Allah. Okay? It does lead back to Allah ultimately. So everything, right? And there's an argument in one of the textbooks that we will show you on how to prove that the existence of God through your smartphone. Okay? How even the smartphone is contingent on Allah. So this is the idea is that it starts with an academic pursuit, which then sinks into a spiritual pursuit, and this will come down to us constantly talking about this in that mode. Okay? So the seeker thus treads this path in life, constantly in awe of Allah and His greatness, and here Allah, the As-Samad, okay? The non-contingent being, and that non-contingent being, every contingent or dependent being depends on this one being. This is Allah. And this is what they've got to realize. And then they think deeper about this. Look, if everything depends on Allah and everything will finish, okay, what happens in the metaphysical realm? And that's where the second year of our course will talk about proving the prophecy of the Prophet, why he is a true prophet. That's where it begins. And then the third year is the life of Medina, politics, okay, how to understand Islamic governance, economics. That's the third year. All of this will be in addition to what they're already doing in Islamic studies. We're just going to shorten that slightly, add on another half an hour to the secondary school day. But I will talk about the practical stuff later on. So ultimately, the journey is thus set in achieving Tawhidic Universalism. This is what the Muslims had, where all these sciences and all these branches, they come from one root. That's the idea, okay? The root. And that's where they all come out, and then you have these various branches. So Muslims see all of that as the root, and Islam flourishing in every one of those. Okay? So I'm going to very quickly go through the last part, the portion, just on what we've done so far. So I'm not going to go into detail, and then hopefully we should have some time for questions as well. So our engagement as a Phrontistery or madrasa thus far. So again, as I mentioned, there is going to be this clash. We don't want, and we've said this to our students, if they have any questions about anything, absolutely anything, this is the space to have that discussion. And we make it very clear that no one's question, if anyone laughs at anyone's question, they need to think about their iman and how humble they are. This is the key thing that we say to them. So again, now myself, for example, I'm more into history or theology, and not so much into science. So I have to learn it from someone else. Right? The Quranic method is clear on that. If you don't know something, seek that knowledge from the people who do know. So I then, we started this journey about 4 years ago, 3.5, 4 years ago. So I went to Cambridge University, there was a course there for about a week. So we stayed over, and that's where I met Dr. Shu'aib Malik. Okay? So he himself is a theologian and a scientist. He's doing his second PhD as we speak on this. So that's where it began. So we met, and that's where we decided, look, something needs to be done. Because he was doing his lecture, I mean, all the academics, they were talking about kind of, dry stuff, and here was this young guy who spoke about new atheism in Islam, and the problem that is happening, and what the problem is based on. The four horsemen in new atheism, they say that Islam is this, but if you look deeper into their arguments, you can see these cracks and holes, because it does seep down to not having a thorough understanding of Islam. First of all, a lot of these atheists don't really know Arabic so well. We're talking about Arabic, we're not even talking about colloquial, we're talking about the Quranic Arabic, which are two different things. Okay? They don't have that deeper understanding. And then again, there's a lot of underlying other issues that are there. And then that lecture that he gave, which is also, we did here in the madrasa, that's available on YouTube. So parents will also receive this as a PDF on WhatsApp. You can click on all the links and open up all those links as well. We then did a lecture on atheism, science and Islam with Dr. Shu'aib and one of our own parents, Sheikh Uthman Ali, who happens to be an alim and also a scientist. He works in the hospital in the lab, so he's finishing his PhD on blood transfusion and things like that. Okay. So that's that. We then went slightly into, because that child who left Islam from that secondary school, he left solely on the topic of evolution. So that's why we wanted to keep that at the forefront. Let's deal with evolution. Let's take it by the horns and let's see what is it actually saying. There's a lot of misconceptions like, oh, it means we came from monkeys. Even scientists don't believe that. But it just says that humans and apes, for example, have the same common ancestors, got nothing to do with directly being linked to monkeys and things like that. So it's a way of understanding what actually is evolution. So even at secondary schools and stuff, it's not really taught the way it should be taught, how it is in universities, in academia. But anyway, we then had ad hoc sessions with academics, mainly including Dr. Shu'aib and Sheikh Uthman Ali, because they were our now locals. Well, Dr. Shu'aib, whenever he comes over from Dubai, he teaches at the university there, then he does come, and the first place we do take him is to our secondary school students. So they would have seen him, asked him all the questions again and again and again. Secondly, what happened as a result of this initial engagement was we set up our second leg, and that was Fatima Elizabeth Institute of Islam, Science and Philosophy. And we have a team now online of about 40 individuals. So for example, one of them is an astrophysicist from working in NASA, finishing her PhD. So she comes here, speaks, and she's like very, very spiritual, very, in terms of her Muslimness, very, very confident in it. So not only that, we get those same scientists to come with us when we can on trips like camping. And then students can see these role models and say, look, this person, not just a scientist, astrophysicist in NASA, as a good Muslim, and having Islam as at the center of their life, and then engaging in science. So this is key. So that role model, the students being able to see that already gives them confidence that actually, what we've been told, oh, all scientists are atheists, it's absolutely untrue. Boulder Dash. Okay. And then philosophy, yes, so that came up, you can read about that there, that the websites are there. Philosophy of science and religion through partnering with Basira. This is where we are now. So everything until now has been happening ad hoc, like here and there and here and there, just dotted around, which is good. But Prophet ﷺ did say, and we take our methodology from him, he did say that that action is best, that is consistent, even though it is very little. So that's the aim, and this is where the method of this course begins. It's going to be about 40 minutes or 45 minutes a day, a week. But then that small drop will slowly seep in and sink in. Now, as I mentioned before, there are 3 years. Now, we're not going to restrict, and we never restrict ourselves to these boxes and these years. If we feel that for the first year, the students need 2 years, then we will slow down and make sure it's done properly. We're not going to have the traditional exams that schools have. I'm a religious studies teacher at school myself, so we're not going to go down that route because that's not the purpose of this course. The purpose is deeper than that. But we will have a very different, dynamic way of assessing the children. So the way they're going to be assessed is, once we've started the course, maybe a few months down, we think, you know what, they're starting to pick up the language to express themselves. What we will do is, somewhat Hyde Park style, where we invite some atheists. Parents can also try and break down their arguments. Students have their one table outside, or their chair to stand on, and they are to, for example, if they're going to talk about the existence of God through contingency, we would like to invite atheists and say, look, argue with this person, and then get them to break their argument down. Even us as teachers, and myself, I will go and try and break their arguments down. That's our first assessment, because then, when their arguments are broken down, and they think, you know what, I knew it all, But no, because when you go outside, your understanding of the world is never going to be a flat line. Never. It's always going to go up, and then you're going to get hit. You're going to come down. And I think this way of assessment kind of helps with that up and down. So the idea is to actually break them down. So then when they come back into the classroom, then that text becomes meaningful. Then they understand, okay, I need to understand this, really understand it, not just to tick a box, not just to be able to regurgitate it on paper, a few weeks later. That's not the point. Here it's about quenching the intellectual thirst, and hopefully, whilst we're doing that, to also quench their spiritual thirst. And this journey is such, especially in the modern times that we live in, the teachers and students will go on this journey together. So going on this journey together. In Mantiq there's two different types of guidance. One is Ira'at al-Tariq, and one is Isal al-Matlub. So Ira'at al-Tariq is, you're going and you've lost your way, you want to go to Tesco. And Ira'at al-Tariq is you show them the way, you guide them. So that you go straight and right, left, and you'll get there. That guidance is very, very important, very important. But sometimes you need the other type, Isal al-Matlub, where you kind of go on that journey together. You know what, you can sit with me, I'm going to Asda, but on the way is Tesco. Maybe I can just drop you by, I can take you to your destination. So here you're going on that journey together. So that's what we've got to understand, that here, it's going to be a challenge. It's not going to be so easy. And especially navigating the intellectual and how that seeps into the spiritual. And it's very important we understand the link between the two. Imam Ghazali, I think, is someone that we're going to really dig deep into, because he went through a very, very interesting journey, very similar to what most of us are going through today. So Imam Ghazali is someone who was you can say he was, to put it very simply, if you have Oxford University as the one at the top in the world, he was running that university. And he was doing this in Persia, under the Seljuk Empire. And people are coming from all over the world to just listen to his lecture, and he's getting hyped up by this. And then what happens ultimately, he's lecturing, and all of a sudden his tongue stops. He can no longer utter anything. And then hukama, the doctors and hakims come and try and fix him, and then ultimately give up and say, look, this problem is deeper. It's an inner problem. Okay? Can you see even the scientists there are saying that we can't deal with this specific problem, this has to be dealt with himself. And then Imam Ghazali lets go of everything, and he goes on this journey of realization. Okay? And he goes to understand himself and connect to Allah, and he comes back 10 years later. He does come back in between, but 10 years later he writes his Ihya Ulumuddin. He writes his revival, or the soul, you can say, of the sciences. So, for example, we're reading Salah, we're fasting, we're doing all of that, but where is that soul? If that soul comes back, that is the solution to a lot of the problems. And that soul needs to come back in everything that we experience, right from us individually, all the way to society, governance, everything. It encompasses all. And that's a key thing to remember. So Islam is maligned, right, by secularists, saying, we've had very bad experiences on when religion did govern, but actually that's a very Christian experience. You've had experience, but it's a Christian experience of how the world, or the Western world, looked like when Christianity ruled states, as opposed to Islam. Is very, very, very different. The prophetic model comes in third year here, and how he governs Medina. So what principles do we take? So that's that. I'm very mindful of the time, so I'm going to wrap this up. I've said that like 4 times, I think, before, but this is it. So we've had this, we've had conferences, you can see the links for those. We had a 5-hour conference on Islam and evolution. So we got some Muslim scholars, that's all there, it's all recorded, you can have a look if you ever get the time to go through those 5 hours, more than welcome to do that. Last point, and this one I wanted to explain much more, but I'll just give it a quick one. When I'm talking about our engagement between Islam and science, how does it look like in a very practical way? A lot of what I was saying was all up there is idealistic and wonderful and beautiful, but how does it look like? So for example, on a very academic level, when we looked at evolution, this was during the COVID lockdown, so we had a lot of time to do online videos. Okay, so there were 3. So Dr. Shuaib, he leads our science and Islam department. He's kind of the lead, the Amir of that. So he did one lecture with Dr. Shadi al-Masri. So he's a traditionally trained Islamic scholar, and he completely rejects evolution. So he's a theologian, he's trained as a theologian, completely rejects evolution. Then did a lecture with Dr. Rana Dajani, who is a scientist, okay, from Jordan. She came here to our madrasa as well. And she completely, totally accepts evolution, even Darwinian evolution. So those two. And then the middle one is, I think, where we find ourselves was with Dr. Solomon Jalajid, who's also part of our online FEP team, Fatima with Science and Islam team. He talks about the concept of tawaqquf. Okay? So what that means is, in simple terms, is wherever the Quran is silent or unclear, yeah, we can understand science. We can bring our understanding of science. But because the Quran itself is silent. But where the Quran is unambiguous, it's very clear, that's where science stops. And that's where there is no any other scientific understanding that comes into the Quran. So very briefly, just to throw this last point in, and then just to hopefully get you to watch these videos. So for example, there's two concepts. So I think Sheikh Yasir Qadi believes in human exceptionalism, that yes, evolution did prevail, especially in other species. There's nothing against the Quran in that, very clearly. But then he says, except for human beings, that there was no evolution or evolution process in human beings. But then again, Solomon Jalajid talks about Adamic exceptionalism, that Adam alayhi salam is an exception to evolution, because the Quran is very clear that Allah says we created Adam with our hands. So it's very clear. So these are these concepts there. So alhamdulillah, one of the things that happened as a result of this, so we've taken this out earlier, but you can have a look. This book, you can kind of say it started here in these classrooms. Okay, this is by Routledge Publishers, one of the most academic publishing house. It's Islam and Evolution, Al Ghazali and a Modern Evolution Paradigm by Dr. Shu'aib. Okay. So he's written this book. It costs £110, but it's open access. So I've given a link. If you go to the next page, if you click on that, or you're not on the paper, but on the PDF, if you click on it, you have access to the entire book as a PDF. You have the entire book as a PDF. So Muslims paid for that access, okay, so people have it all over the world. It's been read by thousands of people now. And Dr. Shea was speaking to me a couple of months ago, actually, very interesting. There was a book written, it was case studies on ex-Muslims. So it was literally, it had mention of, a lot of them were anonymous. It mentioned, look, so-and-so left Islam, this was their experience, this is why they left Islam. So there were case studies in a book. Now, one case study of a ex-Muslim, he contacted Dr. Shoaib after having read this book. And he said, after reading this book, he accepted Islam again. He came back just by reading the book itself. And even though the purpose of this book was to kind of just have that discussion on evolution in Islam, to have that honest discussion. So that person has re-entered Islam, and he was used in a textbook on ex-Muslims. So he's come back to Islam when he's seen that actual academic engagement, not the one-liner engagement that sometimes children are given. Evolution is a theory, not a fact. Things like that. That is going to be problematic for the kids when they go to university and when they're given actual discussions in academia. However, it works like this that will then give the torch to students. Say, look, here are 3 opinions. Okay? Now, don't just listen to them. Go on your journey, because the Quran teaches us. تَفَكَّرُوا فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. You ponder, if you go with that intention and the objective, Allah will guide you. This is where our metaphysical beliefs come in. Then Allah's help directly. But there will be difficult services. We have to give that room and that space. There will be challenges, but you keep at it. And this is what the teachers have to mention. That look, it's going to be a difficult journey. Even us, we are still on this journey, all the way till our last breath. As soon as we're done, then the journey comes to an end. And Shaitan tries his best. Some scholars say that Shaitan actually puts, if you compare the effort that's put on taking someone away from Islam, think of it throughout your life, you will only make 1% effort on you. That very last moment will put the 99% effort to take you out of Islam. So this is for us, it's a journey till the end. So it's not just 3 years, that's what we're going to say. Those textbooks that they're going to get are textbooks that they will keep, and the journey will continue. I just forgot, there is one last point, because there's the last page on this one, and I promise after that it's finished. So alhamdulillah, a lot of this I've already spoken about, so I'm not going to talk about that. But something that I think, when it comes to engagement between science and our tradition, I felt that when it came to the COVID lockdown, so our madrasa closed 2 weeks earlier, and we have the letter there. We engaged with our science and Islam team, and we said, look, how do we engage with this? And we said, the very first thing that comes to us in our philosophy is the prophetic tradition itself. So let's look into the prophetic tradition. You could, if you again click on these letters on the PDF, they will open up much bigger so you can see them. So Prophet ﷺ's hadith on the plague. Okay, so if there is a plague, don't go to that town. Anyone there, don't come out. Simple. And then the second hadith of Prophet when someone's ill, don't present them to someone else who is not ill. Okay, and then we looked at the science behind it. Looked at what plagues have done in the past. We looked at the historical sciences behind it. And then ultimately we decided to close down 2 weeks, even before schools closed down. So that was our engagement with science and Islam, and that was our Tawhidic Universalism at that point. And then we then also got, because Prophet ﷺ, he was told himself in the Quran, وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُمْ وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ, to consult everyone. Everyone is a part of this. So after doing the science, doing engagement with hadith, then we engaged with parents. And the parents, I think it was 89.9% who said we agree with your stance, and then 94.1% said we are happy to go online. So I remember when the actual lockdown did start, we were already online at that point. So yes, that's all the philosophy and the objective of why we are doing things like this, and the purpose of doing this and engaging with this. The main thing, two things, is we've been doing it ad hoc, but we want to do it continuously now. We want to do it regularly, and it's going to be a 3-year course, it could be 6 years, it's the same content. So coming now to the point of the practical, and then we'll open up Q&A. This is the textbook, so we've got them now, but they have not been, this is the first time they're ever published. So we actually got a special copy for our students. So, and we're the first madrasa to actually teach philosophy of Islam, or philosophy of religion, and science as well. So, so in terms of these, I spoke to Basira, so they are the organisation that we're working with. Rather than creating our own curriculum, we teamed up with Basira. They've been doing it for a very, very long time. Sheikh Hamza Karamali, you can, you view his YouTube videos. He talks about science Islam all the time. Again, he's very traditionally trained. He's also an academic as well. I've been to university, so it's brilliant. So when it comes to this book, so he said that it's better, and I agree with him on this to some extent, that he feels that every student should have this, just so that they can make their notes in this. And the idea of this textbook is for them to have it till the end, because it's a lifelong journey. This book, however, because it's not been published before, it is quite expensive. It comes to, we bought it in dollars, but it comes to around £27. So that's what we're going to be charging the students. We're not going to add anything else on that. Again, if you want to break that down, we can arrange that with admin. If you need to pay over 2 installments, we can set that up quite easily. Admin will be in touch regarding that. And in terms of the fees, we obviously have to keep in mind the extra rent of the classrooms, and then also the extra time of our staff. So we're adding just £1 extra per day. Okay, so it just adds on to £4 per month. And that's just to pay for whatever's necessary we've got to pay for, rather than us taking the hit for that. So that's the practical side of it. In terms of how it's going to work in class, so normally our madrasa starts from 9:15 to 1:15. For secondary school students only, it's going to go from 9 o'clock to 1:30. Now, how is that going to work if they have siblings in other classes? Not so difficult. You can bring both children in about 8:55. The youngest children, if it's good weather and it's not cold or very raining, they can play in the playground. There will be staff there inside that caged area, and the secondary school children can go straight up at 9 o'clock. In terms of pickup time, those students who have siblings, we will have a classroom like this where they will just come in, there'll be a member of staff present, and they will just wait for another 10 minutes or so. And the aim is to get them down by 1:25 they start working their way out, so 1:30 they could be picked up. So we have thought about how it could impact other siblings as well, and how to navigate that, make it easy for parents, because I strongly believe there is such an important need for this. Okay? The last thing we want is through an intelligent struggle, our children leave Islam. This, I really strongly feel, the way we teach it is going to have an impact on that, inshallah. So that's it from me. If you have any questions, more than welcome to fire away, inshallah. And you're welcome to have a look at this later on, so I'll keep it back here. Keep a few copies to have a look. Any questions?
I think it's really exciting.
Yes, absolutely. I feel the same.
Yeah.
I'm incredibly excited about this.
My son's 14, so if it does take 6 years, is he able to come along for all that
Yes.
time?
There's another point that I just remembered. So to answer that question, there are two options. So we obviously went for the option that we felt was better for our children, and that was our children having staff teach them in the classroom. They're doing the learning in classroom. They have another option. So we said we'll open up to parents, and you'll get a letter with these details as well. They have an online platform where they go through every single chapter, every single page, via videos and questions and quizzes. So they go through that. So you can have access to that, but they will charge you for that. It does, and for our students, they have put the price quite, brought it down. So normally it's about £200. For our students, it's £90 for the entire year. So we will directly just, whatever it costs them, we will just kind of guide you towards them. And that's an option. If you want to do that, we're more than happy to get you their details, and then we will do all of that running around, and you'll just get a login at the end. You can log in, and if you want, you can go through this with your children. So just say the first bit, there'll be like a paragraph. If you go online, that paragraph will be discussed in a very friendly manner. Sheikh Hamza Karami is very good, and his teaching style is good. That's why we decided to go with this straight away before. This is it. We found that curriculum that we were looking for. Rather than it being ad hoc, it's going to be regular. But every week, it's just going to be 45 minutes, but that is better than just it being ad hoc. Then when we have the conferences, then when we have scientists come over, our students will already have the language to express their ideas and their thoughts and their questions. So yeah, that's the answer. If they want to continue, it's fine. We can also have a system in place where it's basically going to be the last hour of madrasa. So even if they want to come for that hour, and then you want to have that online thing, we can try and navigate that once we get to that stage, inshallah. So once we get to that stage, then we can start thinking about, okay, how can we do this? But the online thing is already there, it's available, and it's really good. Okay, so our staff have access to it, so it's quite good. Yes, any other questions? Don't feel shy.
Does this madrasa go up to age 16, or do they stay on after that?
Oh, I mean, we don't discriminate based on age. So if someone comes and they're 99, we just have to make sure we get their DBS check done, and then after that they're welcome to carry on. But what usually is happening, or tends, for example, like we have 3 students at the back, so they used to come to our madrasa, so they come back after 16 as volunteers. Okay. So for example, this course, if they're volunteering, they'll be, for that 1 hour, so look, just go into that lesson, to attend that lesson. Okay? So yeah, so we'll start. Mahmood, for instance, he joined us from the very first year, and I think he experienced every single madrasa in Waltham Forest.
Yes,
You could maybe write a book on this, and then. But I think what's interesting with Mahir was the fact that through your engagement with the teachers and Ustadh Adil, you were able to not only benefit Islamically, but you got a job in a pharmaceutical company, and now you're actually surprisingly going to be doing a PhD. Okay, well, you were pleasantly surprised. Yes.
Surprisingly shaken.
Yeah. But coming, when you were in schooling, you were doing what basically Einstein did. So in school, he was couldn't even write, couldn't do anything. So I'm not saying that you couldn't write, but yeah. So that's that. There you go. So that's just so that's what we want. That's what we're looking for. We want students to continue in every different field.
It sounds like a great idea, mashallah, because I have 3 children, the eldest is 13, and you do feel that nowadays they do come up with a lot of questions, and not even questions, it's an attitude. What my son says, they say to him in school, are you going halal today? And that's not just about food, it's about music, it's about everything.
Is that teachers who say that?
That's children. That's children from other faiths are saying that. So they do get a lot of
Yeah.
things said to them. It's a culture, an environment,
Yeah.
especially with Islam and terrorism and things
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
I think that's thrown in their faces
Yeah.
a lot. And what you said about people having the iman but not being confident enough to talk about it, I think that is
Yeah.
definitely a case with our younger children. At home,
Mm.
they're okay, they're Muslim,
Yeah.
might not feel confident
Mm.
in a secondary school or maybe able
Yeah.
to say anything about it. So
Yeah.
that thinking and that analysing,
Yeah.
and especially what you said, instead of having an exam, they will be
Yeah,
having
yeah.
that dialogue and debate. I mean, that's amazing, mashallah. You know, that it's not just about theory then, is it? Because for an exam, you're going to write down
You're just
what
memorising,
it's
regurgitating,
putting
yeah.
in practice and then facing that opposition as well.
Yes.
And any questions you have in your head, you'll put on the spot. And
Yeah,
you have
absolutely.
to, so it's
Because
mashallah.
when you do an exam paper, you don't have the examiner
Mhm.
coming out of the paper and
Yeah.
arguing back. So
Yeah.
and it's quite easy in that sense.
It's easy to
Absolutely.
regurgitate what you've learned in
Absolutely.
that theory, but
And
yeah.
I think we need to explain to our children and students that look, you're just experiencing what the Sahaba experienced. So there's a very interesting incident in Hadith where it was someone from another faith, so some Jewish or Christian person came to the Sahabi and said, look, it's quite funny how your faith teaches you everything, like every little bit.
Mhm.
And the Sahabi came back even harder and he said, yeah, I'm very proud of that. And not only that, let me tell you, it also teaches us the method of istinja.
Yeah.
And we're proud to have this as part of our faith. So this is the kind of pride, because people out there, they are proud on sometimes what we feel to be ridiculous things. Okay? Whereas we believe that, look, what we have, the text, so you believe in Allah, you don't, when you believe in Allah, the Quran is a text that we have, and it's not just something that's been changed like a lot of the others, or miscommunicated or written by humans. And for example, the New Testament inspired by God, written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, right? And so it's not, but it's the actual de facto word of Allah. And then informing them that, look, there's the oldest Quran is in Birmingham, right, in Birmingham University. And when you compare the text, which goes back to actually the time of the Sahaba, that Quran, and compare it to the actual text, exactly the same, other than the diacritical, the Fatima, which were added on later anyway to make it easy. So this is key, absolutely, and confidence is key. We need to be confident, and that's why I said right at the beginning, one of the objectives of this is confidence in their Muslimness. And that's why, in our classes, we have names of travellers from different parts of the Muslim world. Okay, we'll have Nana Asma on one side, Chang Hao's Chinese, Abdullah Quilliam was an English Muslim. So we're trying to give them all of the. Kumala Hayati, who was an Indonesian, she was a naval officer who defeated the Dutch naval army, beheaded the Dutch commander with our own hands. So we have all of this from various parts, because remember, as Muslims, our identity is very, very beautiful, because it doesn't really recognize, it understands that there's boundaries between lands, okay? But then when it comes to the concept of ummah, it's not just a concept, it's more deeper than that. For us it means everything. For us it's everything, and Prophet made it very clear, right? He said, if your body is hurting from one side, then your entire body, right? You can't go to sleep, basically. So the ummah is one. The ummah is one. And if Chinese Muslims are hurting, we are hurting. If Muslims in France are hurting, we are hurting. And that's difficult for Europeans to grasp, because their languages are different. They're always at it with each other. That's why when there's a quote associated to Gandhi, I don't think he actually said it, but when someone was asked, what do you think of the Western or European civilization? And that person said, that would be a good idea, okay? Because they haven't ever had that. So this is the thing that we've got to understand. And plus, the thing about Islamic governance, okay, they always have the Christian governance worldview and project onto Muslim governance worldview. And this is the problem with everything. Actually, we've had a very different experience with Islamic governance of the world compared to the Europeans. So yeah, so definitely, absolutely. Any more questions? Was that a hand going up? The hand went up, but to the mouth. Okay. Anyone else? Yesterday's Q&A went to 11 o'clock, so that's like the benchmark. I was just joking. So anything else? Anything on the practical side of things? Yesterday there was, so one question that came up yesterday was, look, how do you, okay, it's very good that they're doing this intellectual pursuit, but I did say, look, I made it very clear that it does begin there, because there's a clash, okay? If you are being told through Scientism that if anyone has this kind of belief in evolution, it equates to atheism. It's been sold like that. That's never the case. Okay? It's never been the case. And we looked at the in-betweens on where the Quran is silent, or what the waqf means, and things like that. So, so the spiritual side is the ultimate objective. That's what it's all about. If you look at the way Prophet ﷺ, if you look at the way he taught the Sahaba, if he taught the children, okay, he never instilled faith at the beginning. What did he do? He played with them. Okay, he went into this house, and at that time they used to have, small homes, and the water used to be hanging from the roof in leather pouches. So he drank from it, and then he got some water in his mouth, and he squirted it on the child. And then that child was known as the one who the Prophet squirted on. Okay, so Prophet didn't go to him and talk to him about faith. No, he won their hearts. And this is another thing that we have to do as parents, as staff, as teachers, other than staff, as teachers. Because Prophet ﷺ, he was himself a teacher. Right? He himself was a teacher. He described himself as إِنَمَا أَنَا مُعَلِّمٌ. I am also a teacher, but guidance is in the hands of Allah. So we have to be those teachers and then rely entirely on Allah. Any other question? I'm thinking of any important things that yes, there was one question that came yesterday. But look, I went through a journey of ups and downs, and I want to really protect my children. Okay? I think what I understand is everyone is going to go through a journey. The Quran has said it. There's no doubt. Right? Allah said, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ. We will indeed, verily, definitely put you to the test. That's the word Allah. So wala, that la itself. Right? It's an article emphasizing that we're definitely going to do this. وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّ. And the noon shadda is also again emphasized. And there's no escaping pain, there's no escaping suffering, and that's going to take various different forms, shapes, and sizes. Who is successful? The ones who ultimately are able to verbally say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, but you can only verbally say that if your mind is connected, if your heart is connected. Only then we'll be able to verbally proclaim that we belong to Allah. We are from Allah, and again this goes back to the contingency argument. When you're saying Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, you're expressing your contingency. You're expressing your dependence on the one who is independent of all and everything. And everything is dependent on him. So it's all linked. It is very much closely linked. So this is why, when there was a Sahabiya, she was by a grave of her child. She was crying. And Prophet ﷺ walked by. We actually didn't throw her out of the graveyard. Okay? He just said to her that, look, have patience. Have patience. And then she didn't look back. She didn't know who it was. And she said, but look, you don't know how it feels like. You're not experiencing what I'm experiencing. And then, keeping in mind that Prophet ﷺ was someone whose daughters had passed away right in front of him. His own son, Prophet ﷺ's own son, 2 sons passed away in his arms. So he's had this same experience multiple times. He himself didn't have a father. He never saw a father. He only had a mother for about, up to age 6. So he just walked off. He didn't say anything. And then later someone there said, did you know who that was? That was the Prophet of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So she obviously ran after him and approached him and said, I didn't know it was you. And then Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّمَا الصَّبْرُ عِنْدَ الصَّدْمَةِ الْأُولَى. That true sabr, true patience is at the very first moment of suffering. The very first moment. We're only going to be able to do that if we work on that. If we work carefully on that. And then knowing that this life is a very short period of life. And we explain this to our students. Say, look, if you want to compare the life we have here, Prophet said, the life of my ummah on average will be between 60 and 70. Let's keep that. And we say, look, even if you live till 100, just say you live till 100 years old, compare that to the metaphysical world, the realm that we're going to live in after that. It's like, you go to the ocean, you take a pen, not even a pen actually, take a needle, and you dip it in the ocean, and you stand by the seaside, that small drop that is falling, and if you were able to have some kind of machine to divide that drop into 100 drops, and then divide that into further 100 drops, and just take one of those, that is this life we have here of 100 years, in comparison to the vastness of what's come before us and what's going to come after us. And Allah is saying, look, this is what you have. This is what you have to make it work, to make it happen. And we are going to test you. This is a test from Allah. Yeah, it's a test from Allah. You have Greeks, the Greek philosopher saying, well, the problem of evil. Suffering exists, therefore God does not exist. You know the argument, the argument from the problem of evil. But we think, okay, if we do take away suffering from the world, what kind of world will it look like? So, okay, if there's no pain, there's no suffering, you take away all the hospitals. Death causes pain and suffering. If you were to take death out of the equation, that means no one would have died for the millions of years that we've been around. That would result in billions and billions of human beings on Earth, which would result in immense overpopulation, and you're back to square one, there's suffering. Okay? It's inescapable. We're going to suffer. It's part of our life, and that's where the test is. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, Jeff?
Allah designed like this.
Absolutely. This is absolutely, and this is key. This is key. And Allah has mentioned it in the Quran again and again. We're going to test you in this way. We're going to test you like this. And Allah says, Prophet ﷺ says actually, إِذَا أَحَبَّ اللَّهُ قَوْمًا ابْتَلَاهُمْ, that when Allah loves a people, He tests them heavy, puts them, they go through this. And this is the nature, the majesty of Allah. And this is the key thing that we have to remind. That Islam is not just in the madrasa, or when you're praying salah. No, these are parts, very important parts of Islam. But Islam is your everything, your breathing, your walking, the way you deal with others, your money, your everything is Islam. We don't have this dual way of living. But okay, there was a doctor in Pakistan he was asked, what's your opinion on evolution? Right? And he said, when I am in the hospital, I agree with evolution. When I go into my house, I disagree with evolution. So this is where the world has taken us. Okay, so some people go to that literal sense of this dual understanding of the world. So we're saying no, our living and our breathing and inna salati wa nusuki wa mahyaya wa mamati lillahi rabbil alameen. That everything is for Allah, because I am contingent. Allah is only non-contingent. And that's where Allah says, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, is one. Allahu Samad. Allah is the non-contingent being, and everything's contingency relies on that being. That's as-Samad. And that's what we want to, inshallah, bring into our lives. So I'm not going to say who is ready for 3 days, but I might as well say. Yeah. Anyway, that was just a side joke. But anyone else, any questions? Someone might say, what are 3 days? We'll leave that for another day, and we'll talk about. So it's just basically there's this movement. They talk about these kind of things. So I used to be part of that at one point. So I kind of went back into that mode for a few seconds. So that's where I came out. Any other questions? You just had your. Okay. Trying to catch people up. Everyone. Your hand went up. Okay. Right. So first of all, just want to get your feedback. I mean, how do you feel about us now doing this? Yes, some people say, look, we don't want our children to go near this. I'm a religious studies teacher in school. Your children, it's going to be forced upon them. We're no longer living in a world where you can just do that. It doesn't exist that well. Even if you, and I'm saying this with experience, through parents, even if you homeschool your child, even then the world that we live in will get to them. It's like the rain. If you walk outside, it will hit you. The cold will hit everyone, regardless of who you are. Okay? So this is how life is. We have to. So we take this, by the horns, and we deal with it. It's not going to be taboo. And the thing is, we have a history of dealing with it. We've done it for 1400 years. Our, early Muslims, why did they engage with Greek philosophy? Because they had to. It was a must of the time. It was necessary. Imam Ghazali himself, and I always recommend his self-biography. He wrote about his own journey. So he studies philosophy, say 2 years, fully just engages, and then he criticizes it. But this is not the way to the truth. It's a good science, but it's not the way to the truth. Fiqh, for instance, very, very important, but this won't directly necessarily connect you with Allah. Okay, that's a difference. And then he looks into Shiaism, different types of Shiaism, and then he criticizes them, etc. And so Imam Ghazali himself went through this up and down, being the most learned faqih of his time. He went through this crisis. What are we expecting from our children? Okay, they are not angels, and we need to take that out of mind. They will be impacted. You know, Prophet ﷺ was approached by Sahaba, and they said, at times we have doubts. Sahaba are saying this, who are in front of the Prophet ﷺ. And what does the Prophet say? ذَلِكَ مَحْضُ الْإِيمَانِ. That is the essence of faith. If you're having doubts, that means there's something that's working against it. All right? There's a scholar who says that if there is a thief and there's two homes, he only has enough time to steal from one of them. Obviously, put yourself in that position. You're going to look through the window, look through the letterbox. One house is, ripped up carpets, right? There's, poorly kept sofas, and in the other one there's a nice big flat screen, and there's all these goods. Where is that thief going to break into if he only has time for one? Okay, he's going to break into the one with all the goods. So Shaitan is a thief, and where is he going to? And Shaitan and all the systems that work under the Shaitanic system are going to approach and going to impact those who have Iman and faith. So that's a natural thing. We shouldn't be worried about it. It's going to happen. The main thing is we need to help them. It's that giving them the torch. And that's what the teachers will be doing, giving them the torch, inshallah.
I think you've hit the nail on the head, because I think dual identity does exist.
Yes.
Currently, I can see from my children, they think Sunday is reserved for
Islam. Yes.
We're around Muslim children, and school, they're a different child. So that definitely exists.
Absolutely, and that's the barrier we need to break. Your Mondays are for Islam, your Tuesdays, your nights, your days.
It's a way of life, and to think everything you're doing, every action, every day, Islam should be a part of your life. And as we were growing up, we didn't have this. Myself, we went to a specific mosque where it was Bengali elderly teachers, like my grandparents' age, and it was literally a case of danda or do your sabak. And we didn't have the dialogue and the conversation. And like you said, little droplets make such a difference. So if they do this for half an hour every week, little droplets in society are making such a difference to them. What's going on around them, it feeds in slowly but gradually, and it changes their mindset. So hopefully, inshallah, this is a positive droplet that they'll be getting. So I agree with it. Jazakallah khair. I'm going to have to rush.
I'll finish that there, inshallah. I'll be hanging around for a little while as well. Subhanallah, bihamdihi, subhanallah, wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. If you want to have a look at the actual